Most people don't realize this, but the reason their garden feels harder every single year isn't because they're doing something wrong. It's because they're planting crops that reset everything back to zero. Every spring, they start over. New seeds, new soil prep, new fertilizer, new problems, and they call that normal. But what if your garden actually got stronger every year instead of weaker? That shift right there changes everything. I've seen small backyards turn into food-producing machines, not because someone worked harder, but because they stopped fighting the soil and started building it. And the secret wasn't some expensive compost system or a miracle fertilizer. It was perennial vegetables. If you're new here on PermaYield, this channel is all about building food systems that get better with time, not more exhausting. So if you care about growing smarter instead of just growing more, hit that like button and subscribe right now. It helps more than you think, and it tells me you want more content like this. Now here's the thing, nobody explains clearly. Annual vegetables take from your soil every single season. You harvest them, pull them out, disturb the roots, disturb the microbes, expose the soil, and then wonder why weeds move in like they own the place. You feed the plant, but you don't build the system. Perennials flip that completely. When you plant a perennial vegetable, you're not planting for one season. You're planting roots that go deeper every year. Roots that break up hard soil without a shovel. Roots that bring nutrients up from layers your tomatoes will never reach. And here's the part people miss. When those roots shed tiny fibers underground, they're feeding soil life non-stop. That means every year, the underground network gets thicker. More fungi, more bacteria, more worm activity. And the soil starts acting alive instead of tired. Take something simple like asparagus. Most people think of it as a spring crop. What they don't see is what it's doing underground for 10, 15, even 20 years. Those roots dig deep. They stabilize the bed. They create structure. You're not just harvesting spears. You're building permanent soil architecture. And once that structure is there, everything around it benefits. The same thing happens with perennial onions, walking onions, sorrel, perennial kale, even certain varieties of chives. The longer they stay in one place, the stronger the root zone becomes. You're no longer resetting the biology every year. And here's where it gets interesting. After about the third year, something shifts. You start needing less fertilizer. Water doesn't evaporate as fast. The soil doesn't crust over. You pull back mulch and it smells rich, almost sweet. That's not luck. That's accumulation. Most gardeners chase productivity by adding more inputs. Perennial systems increase productivity by reducing disturbance. There's a big difference. Disturbed soil is defensive. Stable soil is cooperative. When you stop ripping plants out every season, earthworms start tunneling in consistent patterns. Fungal threads connect plant to plant. Moisture holds longer because the soil structure isn't collapsing. Even pest pressure starts balancing out because you've created habitat instead of disruption. And the crazy part, you don't feel like you're doing more work. You feel like you're doing less. That's the quiet power of perennials. They reward patience instead of urgency. Now I'm not saying replace your entire garden tomorrow, but even dedicating one bed to long-term vegetables changes how your whole yard behaves. It becomes the anchor, the stabilizer, the part of the garden that doesn't panic every season. Once you see that in action, it's hard to go back to full annual chaos. And there's another layer most people don't talk about. Perennial vegetables create shade patterns and windbreaks over time. Taller growth softens harsh sun. Leaves drop and create natural mulch. You're slowly building microclimates without realizing it. That's how forests operate. Nothing starts from scratch every year. Systems layer over time. Your garden can do the same, but it only happens if you stop treating it like a temporary project. Alright, I'm going to pause right here. Now let's talk about the kinds of perennial vegetables that don't just sit there year after year. They actually improve the ground around them. Start with perennial legumes. Most people think beans are just seasonal crops, but certain perennial varieties fix nitrogen in the soil the same way clover does. That means they're literally pulling nitrogen out of the air and storing it underground where neighboring plants can use it. You're feeding the soil without spreading a single bag of fertilizer. And the longer those roots stay undisturbed, the more nitrogen builds up naturally. Then there's comfrey. A lot of gardeners treat it like a side plant, but it's one of the most powerful soil builders you can grow. Comfrey roots dive deep, sometimes several feet down, mining minerals that shallow-rooted crops never touch. Those minerals come back up into the leaves. When you cut those leaves and lay them around other plants, you're basically creating slow-release fertilizer straight from your own yard. Year after year, the soil becomes richer without you buying anything. And here's something interesting. Deep-rooted perennials don't just mine nutrients. They physically loosen compacted soil. If you've ever dealt with hard clay that feels like brick, you know how frustrating that can be. Deep perennial roots break that up from below. When old roots die back, they leave behind tiny air channels. Those channels allow water to soak deeper instead of running off the surface. That means less erosion, less puddling, and healthier surrounding plants. Now think about perennial herbs like thyme, sage, and oregano. They're not heavy feeders. They don't demand constant care. But their root systems stabilize topsoil and reduce weed pressure by covering ground year-round. Bare soil invites problems. Covered soil protects itself. And that's really the pattern here. Perennial vegetables reduce exposure. Exposure is what weakens gardens. When soil sits bare between seasons, sun bakes it. Rain washes nutrients away. Wind dries it out. But perennials hold their place. They act like living armor. Another powerful example is rhubarb. Big leaves, thick stems, deep roots. It shades the ground beneath it and suppresses weeds almost automatically. Over time, the organic matter from fallen leaves builds a darker, softer soil around the crown. You don't have to micromanage it. It slowly creates its own protected zone. And then there are perennial alliums. Walking onions especially. They multiply on their own, spreading gently across a bed. Their roots aren't aggressive, but they're consistent. Consistency builds microbial stability. When soil life isn't disrupted every few months, it multiplies. And when microbes multiply, nutrient cycling speeds up. That means better growth for everything nearby. Here's something most new gardeners miss. Productivity doesn't just come from what you add. It comes from what you stop interrupting. Perennial vegetables teach you restraint. You're not constantly digging, replanting, rotating every square foot in panic mode. You're letting certain areas mature. And maturity in soil biology is where the real gains happen. After a few years, you'll notice something subtle. Your annual crops planted near established perennials start performing better. They look stronger. Leaves are deeper green. They bounce back faster after heat waves. That's not coincidence. That's improved soil structure and nutrient availability working quietly in the background. Even water efficiency improves. Deep perennial roots pull moisture upward from lower layers. That moisture doesn't just disappear. It benefits nearby shallow-rooted crops. You end up watering less often because the entire bed holds moisture longer. And here's where people get surprised. Pest pressure can actually decrease around stable perennial systems. Why? Because you're building habitat for beneficial insects. When plants stay in one place long-term, predator insects establish territory. They don't have to relocate every season. Stability encourages balance. This doesn't mean pests vanish overnight. It means the system starts regulating itself instead of depending on constant intervention. That's the difference between gardening and ecosystem building. On PermaYield, the goal isn't just growing vegetables. It's building a space that becomes easier over time. And perennials are the backbone of that shift. Now, I want to be honest. Perennials aren't magic. The first year can feel slow. The second year might not blow you away. But around year 3 or 4, something changes. The plants are stronger. The soil is darker. Yields increase without extra effort. And you realize you're no longer starting from zero every spring. You're building momentum. And momentum is what turns small gardens into reliable food sources. We've talked about soil improvement, moisture retention, nutrient mining, and pest balance. But there's another major benefit most people overlook. Long-term resilience. That's what we're getting into next. Resilience is where perennial vegetables really prove their value. Anyone can grow a decent garden in a perfect season. Mild temperatures, regular rain, no extreme heat, no surprise cold snaps. But that's not how weather works anymore. Seasons swing harder now. Long, dry spells, sudden downpours, late frosts that catch everything off guard. Annual crops struggle in those swings because they're shallow-rooted and fragile early on. They depend on stable timing. Miss the window, and you lose the harvest. Perennials don't panic like that. Their root systems are already established before the season even begins. When spring shows up, they don't need to start from seed. They don't need weeks of babying. They wake up ready. That head start matters more than most people realize. Take something like perennial kale or tree collards. When a heat wave hits, shallow annual greens wilt almost immediately. But deep-rooted perennials tap into moisture reserves further down. They might slow down a bit, but they rarely collapse. The difference is underground strength. The same thing happens during heavy rain. Annual beds often flood, especially if the soil has been tilled repeatedly and compacted underneath. Water sits on top. Roots suffocate. Perennials with mature root channels allow water to drain deeper instead of pooling. That alone can save an entire section of the garden. Cold resilience is another quiet advantage. Established perennial crowns handle frost better because they've hardened over multiple seasons. They've adapted to that exact patch of soil. That adaptation builds each year. You're not planting something brand new that has to adjust from scratch. And here's something most gardeners notice after a few years but don't always connect back to perennials. Wind damage decreases. Taller perennial vegetables and herbs act as buffers. They slow gusts down before they slam into delicate plants. Even partial wind reduction can protect yields. This layering effect starts small. A clump of chives here, a row of asparagus there, maybe some perennial herbs lining a bed. But over time, those layers create protection zones. Sun gets filtered slightly. Soil stays covered. Roots hold everything together. That's what resilience looks like in real life. It's not dramatic. It's steady. And steady systems survive chaos better than fragile ones. There's also food security to think about. If one crop fails, perennials keep producing. Sorrel doesn't care about a short cold spell. Rhubarb comes back year after year whether you pamper it or not. Walking onions multiply quietly even when you forget about them for a while. That reliability reduces stress. You're not depending on a single planting window to feed your family. On PermaYield, this is a core principle. Build layers that support each other. Don't rely on one fragile cycle. Another major advantage shows up during drought. Deep perennial roots access moisture trapped below the surface long after the topsoil dries out. While your annual lettuce struggles, perennial greens may still hold their structure. They might not explode with growth, but they survive. And survival during extreme seasons is what keeps your garden productive long term. There's a psychological shift too. When you know parts of your garden are permanent and dependable, you stop operating from urgency. You experiment more. You plan long term. You invest in soil health instead of quick results. That mindset change is powerful. Because most garden failure doesn't come from lack of effort. It comes from burnout. Perennials reduce burnout. Less replanting. Less soil disturbance. Fewer emergency fixes. More stability. Over time, your garden stops feeling like a constant project and starts feeling like an established space. You walk through it differently. You notice patterns. You see where shade naturally forms. You understand how water flows after a storm. That awareness only comes when the system stays in place long enough to observe it. And here's the part that really surprises people. Once perennials mature, yields often increase without you adding more work. Bigger root systems mean stronger regrowth. Stronger regrowth means more harvest cycles. You're not pushing the plant harder. The plant is simply stronger because it's older. Age becomes an asset instead of a limitation. But there's still one big question left. How do you actually design a garden so these perennials improve everything around them instead of competing with your annual crops? That's what we're going to break down next. Here's where most people go wrong. They either go all in on perennials and crowd everything, or they scatter a few random plants around and expect magic. Neither approach works. Design matters. If you want perennial vegetables to improve your garden automatically every year, they need to act as anchors. Think in zones. Place deep-rooted perennials where soil is weakest. Hard clay. Plant comfrey there. Poor fertility. Add perennial legumes. Areas that dry out fast. Establish something with deep moisture-seeking roots. You're not just planting food. You're correcting weak points. Then build around those anchors. Annual crops benefit most when planted near mature perennial root zones. Not directly on top of them, but close enough to share improved soil structure. Leave space. Respect airflow. Let sunlight move naturally. Edges are powerful too. Line garden beds with perennial herbs. Chives, thyme, sage. They stabilize soil and reduce weed pressure along borders where disturbance usually starts. Once edges are stable, the center becomes easier to manage. Another key is staggered height. Taller perennials toward the back or wind-facing side. Medium growth in the middle. Lower growers in front. This layering slows wind, filters harsh sun, and reduces evaporation. you're building a living shield. And don't overlook ground coverage. The more soil that stays covered year-round, the less erosion and nutrient loss you deal with. Even perennial strawberries or low-growing greens can act as protective blankets. Now here's the mindset shift that makes everything click. Stop asking, what will this plant produce this season? Start asking, what will this plant improve over 5 years? That one question changes how you choose crops. Perennial vegetables are long-term investments. The first year is planting. The second year is strengthening. By the third and fourth year, improvement becomes visible. Soil darker, beds softer, water soaking in faster, weeds weaker, harvests steadier, and the best part, workload decreases. Instead of tearing everything out each fall, you're maintaining structure, light pruning, occasional dividing, strategic harvesting. The system feels calm. If you're starting from scratch, don't overcomplicate it. Dedicate one bed to perennial improvement. Track it. Watch how soil changes compared to annual-only beds. Within a few seasons, the difference becomes obvious. And here's something important before we wrap this up. Balance matters. Annual vegetables still have a place. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, they're productive and valuable. But when supported by perennial infrastructure, they perform better. Perennials are the foundation. Annuals are the rotation. When you combine both intelligently, your garden stops resetting every year. It evolves. That's the real goal here on PermaYield. Not chasing trends, not chasing miracle fixes. Building systems that quietly improve over time. If this made you rethink how you structure your garden, drop a comment below and tell me which perennial you're planning to add first. I'll read them. And if you know someone who's tired of starting over every spring, share this video with them. Strong gardens aren't built in one season. They're built by reducing disturbance and letting roots go deep. That's how you make your garden improve itself.